Welcome to part 2 of the chilling story of Bruce McArthur, Toronto's Santa Claus serial killer. In this episode, we dive deeper into how a seemingly kind landscaper hid his dark, murderous secrets beneath a facade of generosity. How did he evade capture for so long, and what finally brought him to justice? Stay tuned as we uncover the horrifying truth behind his friendly mask. In November 2012, the Toronto Police Service kicked off a special task force dubbed Project Houston to look into the scandal surrounding the mysterious disappearance of Skandaraj Navaratnam. Let's just call him Skandaraj. Because let's face it, pronouncing Indian names in English can be a real struggle. He went missing on September 6, 2010, and they believe he was murdered, but there's been no trace of him at all. The investigation started after a guy casually posted on the Zambian Meat web forum, claiming he had killed and eaten a man in Toronto. The police even looked into a possible connection between this killer and the infamous convict Luca Magnotta, but that lead was eventually scrapped due to a lack of evidence. And seriously, that website name, Zambian Meat, is pretty intriguing, right? Maybe it's because people have had a lot of misconceptions about Africans for ages. But let's clear our heads here. There are plenty of outdated stereotypes about Africa, and we need to tread carefully when discussing this. Okay, back to the actual case before we get sidetracked talking about meat we shouldn't even be mentioning. By June 2013, Project Houston identified 2 more missing persons cases that shared the same geography and lifestyle as the first victim, Skandaraj. The other 2 victims were Abdul Basir Faizi and Majid Hamid Kaihan. Like Skandaraj, both Abdulzir and Majid were middle-aged South Asian immigrants who disappeared from the church in Wellesley area between 2010 and 2012, around the time Project Houston was formed and launched. Out of nowhere, an anonymous tip from a witness reached the Project Houston police, mentioning the name Bruce McArthur. This info linked McArthur to both Skandaraj and Kaihan, prompting the police to interview him on November 11, 2013. McArthur claimed he regularly interacted with Skandaraj at a gay bar, but firmly denied having any romantic involvement with him. Maybe because Skandaraj was the kind of wild guy who could hook up with anyone at the bar, McArthur felt he wasn't involved. He also admitted to having employed Kaihan, but when questioned by the police, he stated that Kaihan had cut off their sexual relationship and that they hadn't interacted in months. According to McArthur, that was ancient history. Project Houston ultimately concluded, without any evidence linking the missing men to Bruce McArthur, that no crime had been committed, and there was no way to identify a suspect. According to a case summary from 2016, there was still no explanation for what happened to the 3 men. It was like they had vanished into a mysterious fog that couldn't be solved. Skandaraj was the first missing person the police were on the hunt for. Known to his friends as a refugee from Sri Lanka, he came to Canada in the early 90s. He studied at the University of Toronto and later worked at Ryerson University as a teaching assistant, where he was pretty vocal about his hatred for the Canadian government over deforestation issues. In the summer of 2010, Skandaraj got a puppy and absolutely adored it. He loved that dog so much, always sharing photos and taking it everywhere. So it was super strange when, in September 2010, he just left his dog behind and vanished. Skandaraj was reported missing on September 16, 2010. The last time anyone saw him was in the early hours of September 6th, just days before he went missing. He left a nightclub called Zippers with 2 guys. When he was reported missing, the police were informed about his alcohol and drug use. His family thought he might be hiding out because of his immigration status. But there were no signs that anything was wrong. He just disappeared out of nowhere, leaving everything behind. The police took his laptop, and even though they were able to analyze it, they found nothing for 2 years, until Bruce was interrogated in the 3rd year about Skandaraj and the 2 other guys in 2013. The investigation pretty much stalled, and the police moved on to other cases. But Skandaraj's friends and family weren't satisfied with how the investigation turned out. The same thing happened when Abdul Basar Faizi went missing, and Project Houston was ultimately disbanded by the Toronto Police Service in 2014. Abdul Basir was from Afghanistan and moved to Canada in 1999, hoping for a better life. He worked as a machine operator and had 2 kids, but nobody knew he was gay. Keeping that secret caused him a lot of stress. The last time anyone saw him was at 11 p.m. on December 29, 2010, at Steamworks Bath, a gay sauna, and after that, he just vanished. His wife reached out to his cousin, but there was no news. He was reported missing the next day, and for a while, no one knew where he was. Before he disappeared, he told his wife he was going to meet a friend. His car was found on January 4th in the Moore Avenue area, about 10 minutes from the sauna. His family, who had no idea about his sexual orientation, said he had no reason to be in that part of town. But finding the car didn't really lead the police anywhere in their search. On October 25, 2012, a scared little boy reported that his dad, Majid Hamid Kayhan, 58, was missing. Majid was last seen on October 14th, but it wasn't until one of his friends noticed he was gone on October 18th. He was from Afghanistan and lived in the Church and Wellesley area after divorcing his wife, where he had come out as gay. When the police went to his place, they didn't find any signs of violence, but his pet birds were dead. Majid always asked a friend to take care of them whenever he had to leave town. Before Project Houston got shut down by the Toronto police, they received a tip from a Swiss cop. The Toronto police got info from Swiss authorities about a global cannibal organization based in Toronto. It sounded crazy, but it mentioned that one of the members, supposedly named James Brunton, had killed Skandaraj, chopped him up, and dumped him. That's when the police started talking to Skandaraj's family to get more info, and they realized something was seriously off about the disappearances of these 3 guys. Going back to 2001, the police had no clue that Bruce McArthur had been hooking up with Skandaraj for a while, probably right after the assault on Mark, or maybe before. So, they were pretty close, like best friends who had to share all their secrets and chaos. Then in April 2014, Project Houston got shut down. What happened to those missing people? Only God knows, and maybe some true crime show watchers. 2 months later, Bruce McArthur's criminal record got wiped clean, so nobody even knew he'd ever been arrested for the assault case. It was like a case that disappeared faster than cake at a party. In August 2015, 49-year-old Sarush Mahmoudi went missing. He was from Iran, had a wife and a stepson, and one day he left for work and just never came back. Interestingly, when he left, he took a travel bag with him, almost like he knew he'd be gone longer than just a regular work trip. Maybe he thought, who needs a plan to come back? But Sarush wouldn't be seen again for a long time, and his disappearance didn't connect to any other cases. Meanwhile, Bruce couldn't stay under the radar. Clearly, that wasn't his style. In June 2016, McArthur caught the attention of the Toronto police again after he allegedly tried to strangle a guy in his van. Let's call the guy Ryan. Ryan reported that McArthur had asked him to lie down naked on the fur inside the van while they were masturbating together as a warm-up for anal sex. But then, out of nowhere, McArthur started choking him hard. Luckily, the victim managed to hit McArthur and escape after his throat started to tighten up. He quickly reported the incident to the police. The cops acted fast and interrogated McArthur at his workplace that same night. When asked about the attempted assault allegations, McArthur defended himself by saying that all the sexual activities were consensual. He claimed that Ryan had asked for a more intense session, but maybe he wasn't used to rough sex and freaked out and ran away. McArthur also mentioned that the guy bolted out naked without saying a word. Maybe he was just shocked, he said. Strangely, McArthur's alibi held up in court because the police backed his story. But Ryan suffered physical trauma in his throat, making it hard for him to swallow, and he had to be treated for a week in the hospital. Sergeant Paul Gauthier was the officer who approached McArthur about the sexual assault reported by Ryan, the choking victim. However, Gauthier didn't realize that McArthur had already been a suspect in the murders of 3 other men back in 2013. McArthur's case files regarding the assault from 2001 had been wiped by the police, so Gauthier couldn't see McArthur's criminal background at that time. As a result, McArthur managed to dodge any charges. From 2017 to 2021, Sergeant Paul Gauthier faced disciplinary action for being negligent in the 2016 investigation of McArthur, which allowed McArthur to go on and kill 4 more victims after the choking incident in the van. Despite this, Gauthier ended up being cleared of any punishment because it turned out that McArthur's criminal records had been officially erased by the Toronto police. So he had no idea about McArthur's past or his involvement as a suspect in Project Houston back in 2013. Where did everything start to spiral out of control? Between 2016 and 2018, a bunch of guys went missing mysteriously in Church and Wellesley, Toronto. How could this happen, especially after 4 other people had already vanished without a trace over the years? Those years were super tense. The LGBTQ+ community in Church and Wellesley was filled with fear, especially with rumors swirling that the missing guys might be victims of a serial killer. In August 2017, the Toronto police finally set up Project Prism to investigate this situation, particularly after the disappearance of Tess Ritchie in November 2017, which was also handled by Project Prism. Tess was found dead near her home, her body rotting under the stairs of an alleyway. This discovery only added to the panic around Church and Wellesley. The police ended up arresting Kaylin Schlatter, who was convicted of first-degree murder for Tess Ritchie's death. But another killer, Bruce McArthur, was operating much more discreetly, luring his victims without raising any suspicion and managing to stay off the police's radar until 2018. During this time, 6 more men mysteriously disappeared. The Toronto police then focused on the case of Andrew Kinsman, which eventually led to uncovering even more murders. With these new findings, the police started quietly circling back to Bruce McArthur as a suspect. Between 2016 and 2017, a homeless man who also worked as a sex worker went missing. His disappearance happened amidst the police's failure to crack unsolved cases from previous years. Because of this, Bruce McArthur was able to keep committing his horrific crimes without any obstacles, operating slickly like an ant on a black rock in the dark of night. Just imagine how tough it was for the police to track him down. From May 2016 to July 2017, Dean Lisowick, 47, a homeless guy who occasionally worked as a sex worker, was killed by McArthur. Dean lived in one of the shelters in Toronto, just trying to survive. But no one reported Dean missing because he was all alone and nobody really noticed him. So the police didn't get any reports about his disappearance, which allowed McArthur to stay under the radar. From April to May 2017, Salim Eason was reported missing by his husband. Salim was from Turkey, and after moving to Canada, he struggled to adapt. Following his divorce, he battled drug abuse. But before he went missing, things started to get better for him. Then, out of nowhere, he vanished in the gay area without a trace, and no one even noticed. Once again, Salim's disappearance wasn't connected to Project Houston, which had previously failed to uncover the person behind the disappearances of several other men. The victims weren't found, and the project investigation stalled. Then, in June 2017, Andrew Kinsman was reported missing. He was last seen on June 28, 2017. Andrew was a prominent figure in the gay community, involved in various social networks and HIV/AIDS foundations. He was known for being a kind person, always trying to help those around him and the community as a whole. During a press conference, the police provided updates about the disappearances of these 2 men in the Church and Wellesley area, which led to the formation of a renewed investigation called Project Prism. The police stated that once this project officially started, they reviewed the cases of Andrew Kinsman and Salim Eason. However, they concluded that the disappearances of both men were likely not related to each other, nor were they connected to the disappearances of 4 other men from the same area a few years prior.
Don't miss this exciting story. Watch this video until the end to get all the surprising detail. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. That way you won't miss out on any other interesting videos. Join our community and enjoy various exciting stories every week.
The police also said that the evidence didn't point to any serial killer involvement. They were focusing on the disappearances of men from the LGBT community in Toronto, especially in the Church and Wellesley area, where the number of missing persons hit 11 when this investigative group was formed. It's worth mentioning that one of them later turned up on his own without any further investigation. Another victim was found in a river after a while, and there were some suspicions that he might have committed suicide or even died of natural causes. The investigation into these disappearances got more complicated because many of the guys were using dating apps to meet people they didn't know before. At the time, there were a lot of rumors in the community suggesting that a serial killer might be responsible for the disappearances, but the police couldn't confirm that. The idea of a serial killer and the possibility of suicides mixed together created a lot of confusion because there wasn't a clear pattern, making it hard for the police to figure out if these disappearances were connected or just random. When the police checked Andrew Kinsman's apartment, they immediately found a big red flag. His cat was super hungry and neglected. The poor cat looked so desperate that it might have been thinking, "Where's my personal chef who always fills this bowl?" There was no food, no water. Even the cat was sending out an SOS signal. But the biggest discovery that had been overlooked was something even more striking than the starving cat. In Kinsman's diary, which was lying around in his apartment, on June 26, the last day he was seen, there was a key entry, the name Bruce, with an appointment at 3 p.m. You can imagine the police thinking, "Who's this Bruce? A plumber? Or maybe an old buddy who loves to chat?" But sadly, this wasn't just any Bruce. Not Bruce Banner, the actor who turns into the Hulk, who might pop in with Doctor Strange's time machine to save the world or cause some chaos. No, this Bruce was way more dangerous than a rampaging Hulk. Back in 2013, the police had already expressed their concerns that the disappearances of 3 men from the gay community were suspicious and might be connected. They even formed a special team called Project Houston. Unfortunately, those 3 men were never found. So when Andrew Kinsman, a middle-aged guy from the gay area, went missing, the obvious question popped up. Was his disappearance linked to the earlier cases from Project Houston? The police quickly checked the CCTV footage and saw Kinsman getting into a red Dodge Caravan at 3 p.m., which matched the entry in his diary. The problem was, they couldn't get the vehicle's license plate number. But that was okay because the car was pretty unique. A 2004 model, kind of a nostalgic ride for killers who dig that classic vibe. Yeah, it turned out Bruce wasn't just some coffee buddy. The cops started digging into who owned that mysterious red Dodge Caravan, and after a little detective work, they found one name on the registration, Bruce. That's when the metaphorical light bulb went on over the police's heads. Wait, another Bruce? They thought. Suddenly, there was a connection forming between Andrew Kinsman's disappearance and Selim Ison's. This gave Project Prism, which was already underway, a new boost to keep investigating the possibility of a serial killer behind all this. The police were finally realizing that there might be a serial killer at work. Project Prism was also tasked with reviewing all the cases that had previously been handled by Project Houston, which was looking into the disappearances of other men from Toronto's gay community. Case after case piled up, but the results? Nothing. Like searching for a needle in a haystack. And that needle had vanished somewhere. The last time Division 51 formed a special team was for Project Houston, investigating the disappearances of 3 men from the gay village between 2010 and 2012. All those cases were considered suspicious and likely connected. But by that point, the police still hadn't found any trace of those 3 men. Now, with 2 new cases, Andrew and Selim, they were facing the classic dilemma. Is this a coincidence, or is there a pattern? They couldn't yet confirm if there was any link between the cold cases and the disappearances of these 2 new guys. But of course Bruce, not Bruce Banner, not the Hulk, was starting to look like someone they really needed to keep an eye on. So, after the police figured out that Bruce McArthur owned the red Dodge Caravan, they started connecting 5 missing people. There were 3 guys from Project Houston, plus now Andrew and Salim were on the list too. So that makes 5 in total. But wait, what about Sarush? Do you remember that guy, Sarush Mahmoodi? He's not some Persian Aladdin who just vanished on a flying carpet. Yeah, Sarush went missing in 2015, but the police didn't include him in Project Prism because he just disappeared on his own back in 2015. Maybe it was because around 2014-2015, Bruce McArthur was busy trying to raise money to bail out his son, Todd, who got reported by a client for making some pretty creepy phone calls. The cops told Todd to stay with his dad, Bruce, at Bruce's farm. Todd might have been laughing at his dad's quirky sexual behavior at home, but he didn't seem to know that Bruce had a secret apartment where his crimes would later start to unfold in 2018. Oh, and back to Sarush Mahmoodi. He probably wasn't connected to all this until much later. In fact, the media never mentioned Sarush's disappearance in relation to Project Prism. Plus, he didn't go missing in the gay village, so the police felt there wasn't a strong enough reason to link him to the Project Prism investigation. Bruce McArthur became the center of attention when investigators found out he had been interviewed 4 years earlier for Project Houston, where he managed to talk his way out of it with an explanation that would probably make a lawyer grin. Turns out, he also had connections to some of the missing guys. The police started digging deeper, including an incident where Bruce managed to convince the cops with some very convincing reasons. Even though the picture forming around Bruce wasn't exactly rosy, the police initially thought they might have the wrong guy and weren't ready to make him the main suspect. At least, not yet, and they wanted to keep it under wraps. Anyway, Bruce eventually got placed under special surveillance, secretly monitored via CCTV by Project Prism. Every time he left his apartment at 95 Thorncliffe Park Drive, he probably felt like a reality TV star trying to avoid the paparazzi. They also took his DNA from the scene, but there weren't any results yet. During August and September 2017, the police investigators started digging into data from Google, as well as info from various online dating sites and apps, like searching for love in all the wrong places. They also requested statements from the suspects' bank accounts. By the end of September 2017, they got a warrant that allowed Project Prism to track McArthur's vehicle and phone. They even managed to get a warrant to seize his Dodge Caravan, but unfortunately by that time, he had already gotten rid of the car. Smart move by McArthur, right? In October 2017, police checked out McArthur's old Dodge, which he had sold less than a month earlier. On October 3rd, plainclothes officers visited Dom's Auto Parts in Cordis, Ontario, 70 kilometers, 43 miles northeast of Toronto, where the owner, Dominic Viter, confirmed he had bought McArthur's red Caravan on September 16. The police found the vehicle intact, had it towed, and copied surveillance footage showing McArthur visiting the shop. Viteri later said, "I was confused. The cops said they found traces of blood in the vehicle. Oh my gosh, it felt like a bad thriller movie. This blood was identified as Kinsman's, and DNA analysis showed a match with Kinsman's analysis and later with Selim Ison's." At that point, investigators seemed pretty convinced that McArthur might be behind at least some of the disappearances, although they still hadn't made any official statements about their suspicions. Here it is, the part that makes this story feel like a crime thriller, except there was no filming in his apartment. According to the media, Project Prism got a warrant in October 2017, and they found 4 different male DNA samples. One belonged to Bruce, one to Andrew, and the other 2? Yeah, those are still a mystery. Maybe some former untraceable fans. They then got a warrant to secretly search Bruce's apartment, including his digital devices. And what did they find? Some pretty weird photos, like one in his bathroom where Todd and his buddy were laughing while looking at something similar in Bruce's property. But this time, it had a more sexy vibe. Just picture it. A dude posing confidently without clothes, leaving investigators wondering, is this part of the investigation or an audition for a reality show? On his laptop, they discovered over 100 photos of Andrew, and not just your average pictures. 2 of them showed Andrew and Salim. They were naked with tight ropes around their necks. It looked pretty painful. Many of the photos featured guys totally unaware they were being snapped while sleeping. There were photos of anuses, erect penises being licked by Bruce. It seems Bruce wasn't just a farmer but also an artist at capturing unwanted moments. Plus, there were stolen photos from magazines showing naked dudes with athletic bodies that looked kinda strange. It was all coming together bit by bit, like Bruce was trying to compile a photo collection for an uninvited art exhibition. Investigators might have been asking themselves, are we here to investigate missing persons, or did we just stumble upon a naked guy magazine printing operation in this apartment? Oh, Bruce, it looks like you'd rather hide behind the camera lens than face reality. The cops, who were always keeping an eye on Bruce McArthur, finally decided to arrest him after spotting a young guy named John going into his apartment in Thorncliffe Park on January 18th. John was a guy who had hooked up with McArthur several times before. The police let him go in, thinking, if he can get out of that apartment, then he's safe. But they felt the need to act fast because McArthur was acting super shady the last time they saw him. Using high-tech gear, the police monitored McArthur's place, convinced that someone's life was at risk. A source told CTV News that when the officers entered the apartment, they found John tied up on the bed. He had met McArthur through the dating app Growler, and before the police intervened, John had agreed to be handcuffed to McArthur's steel bed frame. As an added entertainment, McArthur had covered his head with a black plastic bag and taped his mouth shut. Looks like he thought he was playing hide and seek, but that's not how you have fun. The police grew more certain and followed McArthur everywhere, collecting evidence bit by bit. They even trailed him when he played Santa at the mall, an activity that made him seem even creepier. On January 18, 2018, the police finally uncovered Bruce's secrets. When they barged into his apartment, they stumbled upon a very unusual scene. In bed, there was a naked guy tied up with ropes and a plastic bag over his head. Next to him, Bruce was sleeping naked, with the victim's parts tied to the bed frame. What was going on here? Was this a horror movie or just a really bad night? Bruce was clearly angry and shocked when the police suddenly arrested him, and he was charged with first-degree murder. He denied all the allegations, trying to convince everyone that he just had a slightly different hobby. But the police didn't stop there. They decided to check out the property where Bruce kept all his landscaping tools because they suspected there was something bigger going on. Turns out, their suspicions were spot on. In the garden, there were 5 large pots, and a tracking dog found body parts from 7 different guys inside those pots. Wow, this is serious. It seems those pots were speaking louder than McArthur ever could, revealing more than he could say in his defense. I was just keeping flowers. Probably wasn't going to cut it anymore. And at that property, they found even more human bones. Not just 1 or 2, but pelvic bones, skulls, hands, feet, like a barbecue party that totally went off the rails. Everything was buried neatly in the ground, but since it was January and the ground was frozen, the police had to take their time, slowly digging up each victim until they found a total of 8 bodies, just in case anyone was wondering where Bruce kept his collection. The remains they found belonged to the guys we talked about earlier: Skandaraj, Abdul Basir, Majid, Sarush, Salim, and Andrew. That's 6 guys, but wait, there were 8 found. So, who are the other 2? Plot twist, my friends. The other 2 victims were Krishna Kanigaratnam, a refugee from Sri Lanka who was trying to avoid deportation and was last heard from in 2015. Then there was Dean Lisowick, a guy who unfortunately lost his job at a bar and ended up homeless. He struggled with drug addiction and eventually turned to sex work to get by. He went missing in April 2016, really caught up in a tough life. Then, of course, he ran into Bruce the Santa, who wasn't handing out gifts, but collecting, more bones. Seriously, it's like Bruce was running a secret bone garden business. If there were awards for this weird collection, Bruce McArthur would probably have won several times by now. But who knew that all this landscaping project of his turned out to be the biggest crime museum in Toronto? On a USB stick in Bruce's apartment, there were 9 different folders, each containing info about the victims. Sometimes he didn't even know their names, but inside were photos of each victim, those 8 murders. and then he hoped there would be one more before the police caught him. He also kept a journal and enjoyed documenting his killings elsewhere. At the place where Bruce worked as a gardener, they found some hair and belongings of the victims in his apartment. It's a twisted way to hide the victims. McArthur would shave their hair, beards, or pubic hair, and stash them in his secret burial grounds in Toronto. He kept his victims even after they were dead, arranging their bodies in certain poses to capture in photos. Bruce McArthur started his killing spree at a pretty unusual age. Most serial killers begin their actions around 28 to 40 years old, but Bruce got caught at 60, making him one of the oldest serial killers in history. The biggest mystery is, how long had these murders been happening before those 8 victims were found dead and missing on his property? Maybe Bruce thought, starting in my 50s? Ouch, better late than never, right? Between 2001 and 2010, several men went missing one by one from Toronto's gay village, especially around Church and Wellesley. Their disappearances were very tidy, resembling Bruce McArthur's serial killer MO. But back then, the police struggled to connect the dots since those cases were old news. It was like a horror story with an unfinished plot twist. These guys just vanished, like magic. At first, it seemed like the police didn't see any connection between their disappearances and Bruce McArthur. Maybe because Bruce looked more like a gardening Santa Claus at the mall than a serial killer. A gardening Santa? What's a big guy who knows how to take care of plants got to do with missing people? That's probably what the police thought at the time. The community started to get worried, like, hey, this isn't a David Copperfield show, right? But the police still treated their disappearances as separate incidents. Everything changed when Project Prism came into play. Like detectives in a thriller movie, the police finally started to realize there was a lot more hidden behind the cheerful laughter of Santa Claus. And it turned out his garden was scarier than it looked. In 2018, Bruce McArthur was charged with first-degree murder for the deaths of 8 men. A year later, in January 2019, Bruce pleaded guilty to all charges and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole until he's 91. This aligns with Canada's decision to abolish the death penalty as part of its commitment to human rights and cooperation with the European Union. But let's be real, while he could technically apply for parole in 25 years, it's highly unlikely that Bruce will ever breathe free air again. If he somehow does, we might all need to question whether Canada's legal system is working as it should. So, just take life in prison to really mean life. Canadian police faced a wave of sharp criticism, especially from the United States, for their negligence in handling missing persons cases. On top of that, accusations of racism spread, especially since many of McArthur's victims came from the vulnerable Asian descent LGBT community. It's pretty ironic, considering Canada often claims to be a champion of LGBT rights worldwide, yet failed to protect this community within its own borders. Maybe Bruce McArthur could look in the mirror and say, yeah, I got away for way too long, thanks to Canada's protection system that's just so well designed. Bruce McArthur, like a lot of organized serial killers, picked his victims from vulnerable men living on the fringes of society, often isolated, struggling with addiction, or leading double lives. For instance, there were guys hiding their sexual orientation because of conservative families, or immigrants with drug issues who were scared of being deported. Many of them weren't even listed as missing persons, making the investigation even harder. McArthur used dating apps to find his targets, and then strangled them with a noose that could be tightened. Some of the victims had their heads and faces shaved, and McArthur kept their hair in plastic bags near Toronto's cemeteries. Even though he was clever, the police eventually caught him, and this case shows how dangerous negligence in investigations can be. To this day, there are still victims yet to be uncovered, which keeps the investigation going. I really appreciate the time you all spent with me. See you next time in the next video. Until then, take care and remember, my love is always with you. Oh, and don't worry, the next story is sure to be even more exciting. Catch you in the next video.